Hello, hello. Could we begin? Is everyone ready? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this roundtable dedicated to journalistic ethics and press councils, which, as you will see, can make a big difference to better inform citizens in the context of increasing disinformation, propaganda, and other fake news. My name is Anna Vidal. I work as legal assistant and project manager for the CDJ, or as we say in French, the CDJ, which is the French and German-speaking Belgian Press Council. The CDJ is a member of the Press Council's EU initiative, which is co-funded by the EU Commission and aims to support the European models of media self-regulation, together with the European Federation of Journalists, academics, and other press councils. Speaking of press councils, two other representatives are here with us today. Pierre Gans from the French CDJM and Sonja Volkmann-Schlug from the German Presserat. Jaume Suau Martinez from Spain doesn't represent a press council, but he's conducted a lot of research on them. So what is a press council anyway, and why are they essential? Well, I suggest we kick off this roundtable with a short video for those of you who may be a bit lost for now.
Breaking news. Kanye West is now running for both French and American presidency. Wait, what? Yeah, you've guessed it. This is fake news, since those have been around a lot. Trusting the information you see, read, or hear is important and becoming difficult, especially since they are sometimes way harder to spot. Independent and trustworthy press is essential for a well-functioning democracy. It guarantees freedom of speech for each and every one, and freedom of information, which allows you to correctly understand the world we live in and to think critically. Thanks to press freedom, new media and journalists are not only able, but also accountable for publishing and broadcasting ethical and quality information. And to do so, the key is what we call journalistic ethics. This set of ethical standards combines all the norms a journalist needs to respect, such as independence or respect for the truth and the rights of an individual. This code of practice, which journalists are accountable for to their peers, has many different applications, whether it be double-checking your information or making sure that your source isn't threatened. Respect of this code is what makes people trust journalists and information, and doing so makes press freedom effective. This crucial function calls for tools used to make sure ethical rules are respected. Press councils. Those councils are strengthening democracies by allowing citizens to check if they are informed in an honest, complete, and independent way. Contributing to better information and trust in journalism, they have two main functions: dealing with complaints and requests from the public about possible ethical breaches, and be a support of help and discussion about professional ethics among journalists. True places of dialogue with civil society, those councils don't deal with opinions and editorial choices, but rather aim to provide the public with the assurance that journalists commit to uphold a code of practice and can be held to account if that code is breached. Created to be independent from all institutions and press organs, free, efficient, and accessible, those councils are self-regulatory bodies working to serve a common good and especially the public. Because a corrected mistake is improved information, journalists, press councils, and citizens need to work jointly to better the quality of information. That's why your implication is important.
Okay, before I give the floor to our first speaker, I'll quickly explain the schedule and how this session is going to go. So the first part will be composed of presentations by our three speakers. If you have any questions during their presentations, please write them somewhere or keep them in mind for later, because around 2:45, 2:50, we'll open up a general discussion where we ask you to participate by sharing opinions, experiences, or even solutions regarding the topic of the day. I'll now give the floor to Jaume Suau Martinez, who's, as you can see on the screen, an academic coordinator and researcher at the Blanquerna School of Communication and International Relations in Barcelona. Welcome, Jaume.
Okay, so thank you very much for attending the session here. I prepared a brief presentation here. Sorry, I am coming from a university, so I mean we like PowerPoints and to bother people with data and so on. I promise not to be too boring today. I'm going to talk basically about some research we have conducted in the framework of after COVID-19 pandemic and how this affected in different European countries trust, media trust, a very important issue in relation also with press and media councils, and also perceptions on disinformation. So basically the idea of conducting this research that we have done within the framework of the Press and Media Council's project in the digital age is a previous research that we have done in my research group in Barcelona, the DigiLab, that happened during the confinement. If you remember, in Spain, the confinement for COVID-19 has been pretty strong. The government asked us to stay at home like almost 3 months. So we didn't know what to do. We had to do classes online. We were pretty bored. So then we said, okay, let's conduct a survey. A survey that we launched in academia, we have a kind of methodology called the snowball effect, which is a very kind of fancy word to say that you send it to whoever you know, and then they start to reply. It's not very exact, then the results. But at that time, we couldn't do a proper recruitment of participants and so on, because everything was closed. And in this survey, basically, we asked people if they consume more news than usual, what was their perceptions on this information, and so on. And one of the main things that concerned us in this survey was this one, that 80% of the people said that they have received during lockdown fake news or disinformation. And most of them actually shared that before being aware it was actually fake. So when we were approached by the kind of media councils in the Digital Age project to conduct a survey about precisely these issues, about how people in different countries have seen information during COVID-19, we thought that that was this kind of preliminary survey that we have done in a very rudimentary way was a good starting point. So then we conducted this survey, interviewing around 2,400 people in Belgium, Spain, and Hungary in September 2021. And I'm going to explain you a little bit some of the results that we gathered. We asked people how their trust on media have changed before and after the pandemic. So actually, the levels of trust in all the countries have been diminished after COVID-19. So we have a certain perception of a problem here regarding media trust after COVID-19. People tend to trust less news media after the pandemic. Not in all the countries at the same degree. As you can see here, in Belgium, for example, shows a kind of less reduction than in Spain and in kind of Hungary. So people tend to trust more news media, although the pattern is the same, a certain reduction on trust. How can we assess this trust? What is the reasons behind this diminish in trust? Basically, most of people say that media were conditioned by their editorial lines when they were reporting about COVID-19. And the other big element that we found, actually, it was a certain feeling of information overdose. People tend to think that media were talking too much about COVID-19 or reporting in an exaggerated way. We didn't find, however, something that we were expecting, which was people saying that media were spreading conspiracy theories. In this regard, as you can see, that's not that important in the 3 countries. And also we asked for ideology. For example, this works in a different way in different countries. This normally depends on the kind of government in power in each country. So people identified more at right-wing or left-wing, behaves or changes trust in a different way depending on the country. In the case of Belgium, we can see also this kind of pattern that changes differently depending on ideology, but still it changes less. It's less diminishment in trust than compared with Spain and also with Hungary. Also, we ask people about the levels of perceived disinformation. As you can see in the graphic here, in Belgium, people self-report that they have been exposed less to disinformation than in Spain and in Hungary. This does not mean that there exists less disinformation in Belgium. That's not the point of the survey, is to ask people if they think they have been exposed, not the kind of real amount of disinformation. But this may mean, again, that Belgian people tend to trust more news media. That's why they have a less perception about disinformation. Also, in Spain and Hungary, those more at the left tend to perceive higher levels of disinformation than those, for example, in Belgium. So we see that perceived disinformation depends or is shaped by the country, but at the same time is also shaped depending on the ideology that you identify yourself. Another element interesting we found in the survey is when we ask people, how did you receive fake news? Through which format do you receive fake news? Because normally in academia and also in journalism, we tend to assume that fake news come from social media, from platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. But actually, when you ask people, most of our participants said no. It's in this kind of formats of audiovisual that you can see in the television or in the radio that they mix information and entertainment. This is the formats that actually people identify the most as the formats that they have seen or they have been exposed to this information. Also, for example, in radio, in digital newspapers, little changes depending on the country, of course, as we have seen in the whole report, but we think that this issue has to be taken into account because there is a big spread of disinformation in media, in formats that is not precisely just about information, but that they mix information and entertainment. And the people have the perception that is in these formats that this information spreads to. So actually, in order not to extend too much, what can we learn from our survey? There is a certain need to regain trust on news media and in journalism after the pandemic. We have seen how in different countries, trust on media has been diminishing at different levels in Belgium, Spain, and Hungary, but overall, the problem is identified. People tend to trust less news media than before. For example, I put the example of Belgium again, because we are here. Just 20% of citizens in Belgium, they do not trust news media. This may seem just a little bit, but it's 1 in 5. I mean, one in 5 people in this room perhaps says that they don't trust news media. What happens when you don't trust news media, traditional news media? Then you feel the need to get informed elsewhere. So you normally go to sources of information that they are not that reliable. So distrust on news media is a source of people going to look for news in places that perhaps they are spreading fake news and disinformation. So it's a very big problem. And then also we ask in the survey the level of awareness of people about press and media councils. And for example, we found that in Belgium, for example, 22% of people are aware of the existence of press and media councils. So therefore, this highlights the need of projects that the one we are involved, that is precisely to raise awareness about the work of press and media councils. As we have seen in the video, is the key institutions for the development of a healthy democracy. So we need to increase the awareness among the public about the possibilities that press and media councils are offering for life in democracy and in journalism. We have seen here some data about that the level of knowledge is very kind of reduced, and even on those that they say they know the existence, they are not aware of all the possibilities, like filing a complaint and so on. So we need to do more work about that. I hope I didn't extend that much the time, so thanks for your attention. Merci de votre attention. And the last one, sorry, I'm not able to pronounce that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jaume, for an interesting opener. About COVID-19, I think it's worth noting that in the case of the CDJ, while 2020 had timidly paved the way, more than a third of complaints in 2021 regarded the journalistic treatment of the sanitary crisis, including on vaccination and the so-called COVID certificate. The rate of inadmissibility of these complaints was higher than the average, but many of them were investigated and some of them declared founded. And with two exceptions, the complainants did not consider themselves directly concerned or prejudiced by the journalistic productions in question. They only felt the need to know the opinion of the press council. And what we call citizen complaints are actually now more frequent than those with a direct interest, which marks a real shift with previous years. And whether it is an encouraging reminder of what journalism should be or a manifestation of distrust in the press, we must encourage the public, of course, to care about journalistic ethics. So I'll now give the floor to Pierre Gans, the Secretary of the French CDJM, the Council of Journalistic Ethics and Mediation. He will give his presentation in French, but I'll summarize it in English afterwards. Pierre, do you want to sit there and we bring you a microphone? No, you're coming. Okay.
Thank you. My English is very poor, and I don't want to bend you here for 10 minutes in speaking English, so thank you for listening to me in French. It's quite a good language. Accuser les journalistes de faire la propagande, ce n'est pas quelque chose de nouveau. Cette accusation aujourd'hui se répand cependant sous l'effet de trois facteurs. D'abord le poids des réseaux sociaux, ensuite son utilisation par des politiciens comme réponse aux questions et aux critiques qui leur sont adressées, enfin par la polarisation de nos sociétés démocratiques. J'entendais ce matin notre confrère Balint Ablizi, hongrois, parler de tribalisme politique, et je trouve que cette expression résume assez bien la situation dans nos pays européens démocratiques. Le Conseil de déontologie journalistique et de médiation français a par exemple reçu entre septembre 2021 et juin 2023 des dizaines de saisines qu'il n'a pas retenues parce qu'elles mettaient en cause la ligne éditoriale ou un choix rédactionnel d'un média. Tout était lié à la campagne électorale qui se déroulait en France, et très souvent, leurs auteurs accusaient les journalistes de faire de la propagande. Pour cela, et propagande, ceux qu'ils n'ont pas envie d'entendre. Il a été répondu à chaque personne qui nous avait écrit personnellement en lui expliquant pourquoi sa saisine n'était pas recevable, parce qu'elle mettait en cause la ligne éditoriale ou un choix rédactionnel. C'est un travail de fourmi. On peut raisonnablement espérer que sur la centaine de lettres ainsi rédigées, quelques-unes auront eu un effet positif, mais c'est une première réponse à la question posée par cet atelier: comment est-ce que les conseils de presse peuvent répondre à la propagande? Mais si ces citoyens voyaient de la propagande là où elle n'est pas, ils savent que cette propagande les guette partout. Et les journalistes et les conseils de presse doivent aider le public à identifier la propagande. C'est une tâche difficile. Les propagandistes savent mieux que quiconque déguiser leurs travaux en production journalistique. Et dans le même temps, on a approfondi l'analyse, heureusement, on a approfondi l'analyse de ces objets non journalistiques. La chercheuse américaine Claire Wardle, peut-être va-t-on trouver quelque part, parce que je ne voudrais pas... Voilà, merci beaucoup. Ceci est le travail de Claire Wardle, qui a vraiment publié une grille d'analyse des mésinformations et de la désinformation, et je vous conseille de vous reporter à ces travaux qui vraiment ont permis de travailler et de faire le tri dans ce qui est proposé au public. Le premier rôle d'un conseil de presse par rapport à cette question sera alors de distinguer l'erreur du journaliste, toujours possible, erreur de bonne foi, due à un manque de rigueur, à un manque de connaissances, à un manque de temps, à un manque de moyens, distinguer cette erreur du journaliste du faux qui est construit, pensé, organisé, et dont le degré de falsification varie du contenu authentique mêlé à de fausses données contextuelles jusqu'au contenu fabriqué à 100%. Il faut être clair, a priori, ce faux ne relève pas du conseil de presse parce que ça n'est pas du journalisme et que le conseil de presse se prononce sur des actes journalistiques, mais on ne peut pas ignorer l'impact de ces faux. Alors, les conseils de presse, à mon sens, ne sont pas les seuls outils de lutte contre les fake news et la propagande. Ce sont les rédactions, par leur travail de contre-enquête, de démontage des fake news, qui sont en première ligne. Mais il faut dire que si les pages de fake news de démontage, de fact-checking sont nécessaires, on sait qu'elles ne font pas changer d'avis ceux qui sont convaincus que la vérité n'est pas dans les médias. Il faut le faire, mais c'est un petit peu remplir le tonneau des Danaïdes. Les tribunaux peuvent jouer un rôle dans cette lutte contre les fake news. La loi française de 1881, par exemple, 1881, prévoit un délit de diffusion de fausses nouvelles qui implique l'intention de diffuser une fausse nouvelle, mais il a été très peu utilisé en 140 ans parce qu'il est difficile de cerner cette notion de fausse nouvelle. Et ça doit faire réfléchir tous les législateurs qui veulent introduire ce délit dans leur arsenal. Ces dernières années notamment, le gouvernement français a introduit des dispositions nouvelles, par exemple pour combattre les fausses nouvelles en période électorale. C'est un dispositif assez complexe qui revient à donner 48 heures à un juge pour estimer si un contenu est vrai ou faux. On voit les risques que cela comporte, surtout quand cette notion de fausse information est passible des tribunaux, ouvre la porte à des choses très dangereuses. La tentation est en effet grande pour les pouvoirs de criminaliser tout ce qui ne leur plaît pas, ou de tenter de criminaliser tout ce qui ne leur plaît pas. Autre outil essentiel dans cette lutte, l'éducation aux médias. C'est un travail de longue haleine pour former les citoyens à débusquer les mensonges déguisés en faits établis dans la masse de ce qui leur est proposé. Les journalistes et les conseils de presse ont certainement un rôle à jouer dans cette campagne de formation des citoyens. Ils apportent l'éclairage sur le métier de journalisme, objet d'ignorance et de fantasme. Connaître le métier de journalisme, c'est déjà être moins sensible aux fake news et à la propagande. Cette connaissance du journalisme est la première étape d'une compréhension de la différence entre information et propagande. En France, depuis 2015, se sont multipliées ce qu'on appelle des résidences de journalisme. Pendant plusieurs mois, un journaliste est détaché auprès de la collectivité éducative d'un territoire. Il va animer dans les collèges, dans les lycées, avec les enseignants, avec le public, des ateliers d'éducation aux médias. C'est un investissement à long terme pour la démocratie. En France, le CDGM a mis en place depuis un an un module d'animation destiné au grand public, dans des manifestations plus ou moins centrées sur des questions d'information, festivals comme celui-ci par exemple, salons, il en existe plusieurs, salons de la presse, salons de l'information en France. Le CDGM propose des ateliers de déontologie d'1h30. Le public est invité à une sorte de jeu de rôle, où, après avoir pris connaissance des bases de l'éthique du journalisme, exactitude, véracité des faits rapportés, indépendance et responsabilité du journalisme, respect de la dignité des personnes et de la vie privée, le public est invité à analyser et à débattre de cas précis pour se prononcer sur le respect ou non des bonnes pratiques. Mais dans la masse de ce qui est publié tous les jours, comment distinguer ce qui relève de la propagande et ce qui doit être soumis à un conseil de presse ? La grille d'analyse du CDJM interroge d'abord la nature de l'objet dont il est saisi. S'agit-il d'un acte journalistique, c'est-à-dire d'une publication qui n'a d'autre but que d'informer le public sur des sujets d'intérêt général? Je voyais tout à l'heure, dans ce que nous a montré le premier intervenant, le poids des shows télévision dans la diffusion des fausses nouvelles, et je pense qu'il ne s'agit pas là d'acte journalistique au sens strict, et qu'il faut le dire. Comme le disent de nombreux codes, et par exemple la Charte mondiale d'éthique des journalistes, la responsabilité du journaliste vis-à-vis du public prime sur toute autre responsabilité, notamment à l'égard des pouvoirs publics ou de l'employeur. Et je ne suis pas certain que ce soit la responsabilité du journaliste qui soit au centre des choses dont on parlait tout à l'heure. L'objectif du propagandiste est d'influencer les perceptions, les attitudes, les opinions, les politiques, dans un but partisan, commercial. Son postulat de base se retrouve invariablement dans le slogan moralement interdit aux journalistes, la fin justifie les moyens. Il est le soldat de quelqu'un. Le propagandiste appuie son propos sur des émotions, sur des opinions, sur des certitudes assénées et non démontrées, quand le journaliste s'appuie sur des faits vérifiés, recoupés, prend du recul, cultive le doute méthodique, cherche la contradiction. Voilà une grille d'analyse qui permet de démêler un petit peu le bon gré de l'ivraie. Elle est forcément perfectible. Écarter les productions à caractère publicitaire est relativement facile, même si aujourd'hui, de plus en plus, les publicitaires savent déguiser leur contenu en propagande, leur contenu de propagande commerciale en contenu qui se veut informatif. Le cas de la propagande politique est autre, et si la possibilité de saisir un conseil de presse est limitée aux médias qui ont assez adhéré, c'est le cas dans certains pays où existent des conseils de presse, le problème de la propagande politique ne se pose pas trop. On imagine mal en effet un conseil de presse admettre en son sein un titre qu'il estime être un pur organe de propagande. Donc il n'y aura pas de saisine qui le concerne. Par contre, si le conseil de presse peut être saisi de tout contenu des médias destinés à l'information d'un public, plusieurs questions sont alors à examiner. Est-ce que le support mis en cause est un organe d'information agissant dans un écosystème libre? Autrement dit, la possibilité pour le journaliste de travailler dans le seul intérêt du public et du pluralisme est-il assurée? Je vous prends un exemple. Il y a 2 ans, le CDJM a été saisi d'une émission de Radio China International en français, destinée au public français et accessible en France via des chaînes diffusées sur Internet. Cela entrait donc dans le champ du CDJM, puisque le champ du CDJM, c'est tout ce qui est destiné au public français accessible en France. Nous avons cependant rejeté cette saisine sur le plan de la recevabilité, en arguant que l'éthique du journalisme est indissociable de l'indépendance des journalistes, donc de leur capacité à jouir, comme tout citoyen, de la liberté d'expression. Et lorsque celle-ci, avons-nous dit, n'est pas effectivement garantie, l'analyse du respect de la déontologie est quelque chose d'assez vain. Dans nos démocraties, donc, un conseil de presse se demandera si l'objet de la saisine relève de la liberté d'expression et de sa déclination journalistique, la liberté éditoriale. Si oui, il n'y a pas de propagande et il n'y a pas de problème déontologique. Le conseil de presse peut aussi s'interroger sur la nature du média. Et alors là, il y a d'autres questions qui s'opposent. Est-ce qu'il faut écarter systématiquement les saisines qui concernent un média idéologiquement marqué, par exemple le journal d'un parti politique? Le journaliste qui y travaille est-il hors déontologie? Fait-il œuvre de propagande s'il respecte les faits, mais les présente, les organise, les analyse à l'aune des valeurs qui sont portées par ce journal? Certains répondront que le journaliste a renoncé à toute indépendance par rapport à sa source ou à son employeur en se plaçant de facto au service d'autres intérêts que celui du public à être informé, ce qui peut conduire quand même, et il faut y réfléchir, à une extension très large de la notion de propagande. Le journaliste d'un journal membre qui serait par exemple l'organe central du Parti communiste français, pour prendre un exemple, qui couvre actuellement la Coupe du monde de football, fait-il acte de propagande? Le conseil de presse, il y a des zones grises enfin dont je voudrais parler, des pays où la propagande a pris le dessus sur l'indépendance des médias, mais où subsistent des espaces journalistiques, souvent sur des supports nouveaux, des blogs, des boucles numériques par exemple, fabriqués de l'étranger quelquefois, mais destinés au public du pays concerné grâce aux technologies nouvelles que, heureusement, les outils de censure n'arrivent pas tous à interdire. Un conseil de presse peut jouer alors là un rôle pour aider le public à y voir clair. Et je voudrais ici citer ce qu'Olga Kravtsova, du Public Press Collegium russe, le conseil de presse russe, me disait dans un échange par mail en avril 2021. Le conseil de presse russe reçoit souvent des plaintes concernant des articles de presse qui ressemblent manifestement plus à de la propagande qu'à du journalisme. Nous prenons toujours en compte ces cas et reflétons cette différence dans notre décision simplement parce que le public les perçoit comme du journalisme. Il semble important de rappeler une fois de plus au public comment distinguer journalisme de la propagande et pourquoi les articles de propagande enfreignent les règles éthiques du journalisme. Et comme ces médias sont souvent contrôlés par l'État, ajoutait ma consoeur russe, et que nous savons qu'il n'existe aucun moyen de faire pression sur eux, il est important d'exprimer au moins l'opinion d'une communauté médiatique indépendante, à savoir que ces articles ne sont pas du journalisme éthique. Je pense que, et ce que disait Olga, à mon avis, le démontre, là où un espace de liberté, même petit, subsiste, un conseil de presse a un rôle à jouer. Dernière remarque pour tenter de répondre à la question « How can journalistic ethics and media councils make a difference to better informed citizens ?» Vous voyez, j'arrive quand même à parler un peu anglais. Il n'est pas inutile pour les journalistes et les citoyens d'avoir en mémoire, surtout en temps de guerre, comme celui qui court en Europe en ce moment, ce qu'est la propagande de guerre. Anne Morelli a listé les 10 commandements dans son livre « Principes alimentaires de guerre ». Les voici, de la propagande de guerre. Ils sont affichés ici et je vous invite aussi à lire ce livre. Mon sentiment, à la lecture de ces 10 sentences, c'est que je ne suis pas certain, et pas certain du tout, que la propagande, et particulièrement la propagande de guerre, ne soit le fait que des régimes totalitaires ou illibéraux. Merci de votre attention.
Okay, thank you, Pierre, for this presentation on the increasingly blurred line between journalism and propaganda. As promised, I'll read a summary in English for those of you who don't speak French, including our dear speakers. So here we go. Accusing journalists of being propagandists is not new. However, this accusation is now becoming more widespread as a result of three factors: the weight of social networks, its use by politicians as a response to questions and/or criticism of the media, and the polarization of our democratic societies. For example, the CDJM received numerous referrals regarding the 2022 presidential campaign that the Council did not accept because they questioned the editorial line or an editorial choice of a media outlet. Very often, their authors accuse journalists of spreading propaganda. If these citizens saw propaganda where it was not, they know that it is lurking. Journalists and press councils must help them to identify it. But this is a difficult task, as propagandists are becoming increasingly good at disguising their work as journalistic output. But at the same time, the analysis of these non-journalistic objects has been intensified. For example, the American researcher Claire Wardle has published analytical guidelines for misinformation and disinformation. This is the slide you're seeing here. So the first role of a press council would then be to distinguish between the journalist error, which is always possible, and the degree of falsification, of which varies from authentic content mixed with false contextual data to 100% invented content. A priori, this falsification does not fall under the scope of press councils because it's not journalism, but their impact cannot be ignored. For Pierre Gans, press councils are not the main tool in the fight against fake news. The newsrooms are in the front line through their work of counter-investigation, of debunking fake news. The courts can also play a role in this fight. In recent years, the French government has introduced new regulations, for example, in order to combat false news during election periods. The system is complex and gives judges 48 hours to assess whether a content is true or false. Above all, this notion of false information subject to the courts is dangerous because the temptation is great for the authorities to seek to criminalize what they do not like. The other essential tool is media literacy. Journalists and press councils have a role to play in this campaign to educate citizens. They shed light on the profession of journalism, which is subject to ignorance and fantasy. This knowledge of journalism is the first step in understanding the difference between information and propaganda. For the past year, the CDJM has set up an animation module aimed at the general public, where the public is invited to a role-playing game where, after learning about the basics of journalistic ethics, they are invited to analyze and debate specific cases to decide whether or not they respect good practice. So, how can we distinguish propaganda in the mass from what is published and submitted to the opinion of a press council? The CDJM's analysis grid first questions the nature of the object submitted to it. Is it a journalistic act, a publication that has no other purpose than to inform the public about subjects of general interest? The Press Council could also question the nature of the media, but should it then systematically reject referrals concerning an ideologically marked media, for example, the newspaper of a political party? Some will answer that the journalist has renounced all independence from his source or employer by placing himself at the service of interest other than that of the public to be informed. But this may lead to a very broad extension of the notion of propaganda. Lastly, there are gray areas, countries where propaganda has overtaken media independence, but where there are still free journalistic spaces, often on new media. A press council can play a role in helping the public to see things clearly in this case. A final remark to try to answer the question of the day. It is useful for journalists and citizens to remember, especially in these times, what war propaganda is. Belgian historian Anne Morelli has listed 10 basic principles of war propaganda. Here they are on the screen. I'll let you read them for a minute or so. And in conclusion, Pierre Gans is not sure that propaganda, and particularly war propaganda, is only the domain of totalitarian or illiberal regimes. So thank you for listening once again. And thank you. And last but not least, let's hear Sonja Volkmann-Schluck, who's the Public Relations Officer of the German Press Council.
Yes, thank you. As a last speaker, I would like to give you some insight into the practical work of press councils. And I have also brought with me a concrete example of a newspaper article that we had a judgment about. This is against, of course, against the background how press councils can preserve duty of care and truthfulness in media. And in Germany, we have a special legal situation. Since 2 years, we have the so-called Interstate Media Treaty. And in the end, I will talk a little bit about that, what it means for our media landscape, actually, in Germany. So we are the voluntary self-regulation of the German press. We are the address for readers' complaints about reports in newspapers, magazines, and online portals. We are not responsible for broadcasting. That are other authorities. I will come to that, back to that a little bit later. We monitor compliance with the ethical rules for the daily work of journalists laid down in the German Press Code. And we are supported and mainly financed by the 4 major journalists and publishers associations in Germany, which are the DJU and the DJV, you see on the right side, which are the main unions, and the main publishers associations BDZV and MVFP. And about 1/3 of our budget is made of a state grant. I think that's also quite unique in Germany. I just want to make clear that the government doesn't have a say in our decisions. It doesn't have a say in our how we are in our composition of our committees. We have a law in Germany that the voluntary self-regulation of the German press is essential for democracy, and that's why we get the state grant. I think what's also quite unique and maybe different to France now, that about 95% of the German publishers are committed to the press code. So we have a very broad coverage and a very broad acceptance of the press code within Germany. Why is that so? Maybe because we are already a very old institution. We were already founded in 1956. In 1956, the Chancellor Adenauer wanted to create a federal press law that would give the government much more control through so-called press committees on the press. And you know, it was 1956, the Nazi time was only 10 years over, and journalists and editors were very alarmed by this proposal, and then they decided to avoid such control over the press, and so they just created the Press Council. So the principle is self-regulation instead of state control. And we as a German Press Council, we do really lobby for press freedom. That I will come back to that also a little bit later. That also plays a role, for example, in the topic of data protection. We have made some exemptions for this for journalists, and this was also a result from our lobbying. So just to make clear, we are no censorship organization or anything. We are made up of journalists and editors. Just a short word about the press code itself, about the rules for fair journalism that, as I just said, 95% of the publishers' houses follow in Germany. On the one hand, we have truthfulness, duty of care, independence of journalists, and a big topic is also hidden advertising, not to mingle up content, journalistic content, and advertising. This is one part of the press code. And the other part is the protection of individuals and minorities. It is the protection of victims and suspects at the same time. We have a discrimination ban, for example, discrimination because of nationality or ethnic background. It's about fair research and data protection. 4 times a year, our committees meet and talk about the cases and the complaints. These commissions, complaints commissions, they are called, are made up of 4 journalists and 4 editors and publishers. So if the complaint is founded, there will be a sanction. I just have a little overview of our sanctions. We have the advice note for minor infringements of the press code. We have the disapproval for bigger infringements, and we have the public reprimand. The public reprimand is our hardest sanction. It means that we, shortly after our sessions, we will publish a press release that the named newspaper has been imposed with a public reprimand for a very hard infringement of the press code. And we name the name of the newspaper or the online outlet, and we will tell against which section of the press code there was an infringement. So there are no fines. We cannot block any content or so. The goal of the Press Council in Germany is to have a debate on the infringements and about ethical rules. Just a short look on our statistics. We have a very high level of complaints. Actually, 2020, we had a real record. It was more than 4,000 complaints. It was due to the pandemic, of course. Many people were turning to us and also saying that reporting was too sensational. But above all, they had some doubts if it was true, the reporting. So actually, every 3rd complaint related 2021 to suspected errors in reporting. So the topic truthfulness, duty of care is a high concern of readers and users. And they turned to the Press Council to ask if there was, for example, untrue reporting. Within reporting about the pandemic, it was almost 80% of complaints that had doubts about the information of the articles. But I have to say, maybe in Belgium it's just the same, that many of these complaints were not only driven by rational reasons, they were also driven by ideology. For example, people who doubted vaccination in general, for example, or who wouldn't trust state authorities' numbers, and so on. So in 2020, we had quite a lot of complaints about a report by Bild. Bild is the biggest tabloid in Germany. They reported about Christian Drosten. You see him here. It's the most important virologist in Germany. And they doubted a study he had made about contagious children. They stated questionable methods. Drosten's study on contagious children is grossly wrong, they said. And they asked how long has the star virologist known about it. So they doubted his truthfulness in a way, his honesty. And we had many readers complaining about this because they said that the study was preprint only, that it hadn't been checked against. That is a very big problem, I think, or that used to be a problem in the early days of the pandemic, that media had to report about preprint studies, and nobody really knew what was the effect of the pandemic so far. But they stated it is just wrong. And actually, the headline, grossly wrong, was not covered by the content. They had asked some experts, and they had doubts about the study, but nobody said that it was grossly wrong. And the report did not mention that the study was preprint only and had not been revised yet. There was also an incorrect translation within the report, and the journalists of the article had given Mr. Drosten only 1 hour for answering their questions before publishing the article. So these were quite hard infringements against the duty of care and truthfulness, and so we imposed a public reprimand on this article. So this is just an example how the German Press Council deals with truthfulness and duty of care, and what are criteria for this. Just to come back to our responsibilities. As I just said, we are responsible for the print media and their online outlets. We have other authorities being responsible for the broadcasting stations. But over the years, there developed a big gap, actually because of all the online media that have emerged in the 10 last years. And since 2020, the state authorities have gained some new power because of a new treaty. It's called the Interstate Media Treaty. And they are now automatically responsible for imposing some sanctions on these online outlets that are not committed to the Press Council and that are not committed to the other authorities for the public broadcasting. Why did they want to do that? Obviously, to fight fake news, because maybe it's in Belgium just the same. We have many new online outlets that are quite serious, that are reporting about special topics, but we also have some outlets that follow, for example, conspiracy theories and so on. And so this Interstate Media Treaty wanted to do something against that. And so I just brought a little text from this. It says that telemedia, which means online media with journalistic editorial content, shall comply with recognized journalistic principles. News shall be checked for content, origin, and truth by the provider prior to the dissemination with the due diligence required under the circumstances. There's one exception they made in this text. If an online outlet commits itself to the press code and the German Press Council, it's been out. You know, the German authorities do not have any grip on them anymore. So what followed out of this, I just make it a bit shorter, we have many new members now in the way that many of these media outlets sign some commitment with the German Press Council because they see many advantages. Because then their content cannot be blocked anymore, they do not have to pay any fines, but of course they have to take part in our procedures then. Anyway, we have about 40 new media that are with us now. Which are quite big media. For example, web.de. It's a news site against the background of a big provider of emails in Germany. I think it may be the same in Belgium, that email providers have, of course, news on their sites as well. That is one very big example. But we also have some very specialized blogs, for example, on media critique. It's called Übermedien. They are with us now as well. But of course, we do not take everyone. I think the most important criteria is that they have to be compatible with the fundamental values contained in the press code, of course. We do not take media outlets that are only shown on YouTube, because that's broadcasting in our view. And they have to have a business model, and they have to be regularly updated in their coverage, and they, of course, have to be independent content. They have to produce independent content, not advertising. No influencers, for example. Influencer would not be able to subscribe to our procedure. Yes, thank you. That's for the first time, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
I'm way shorter than Sonia. And thank you, Sonia. It seems that the Interstate Media Treaty is a strong legal incentive for new media to join the German Press Council. I should point out that in French and German-speaking Belgium, joining the CDJ is a precondition to receive state funding, thus a financial incentive. Another motivation, of course, is to stand out, which means being recognized by the journalistic community and building trust with the audience. Okay, so we can now open a more general discussion with the audience. If you have any question regarding a presentation or a press council, please don't be shy. We're gonna have microphones coming at you. Yes, I'll stay here and I give this to you.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations, and I'm so happy to see a representative of Presserat here because I'm such a huge fan. But your story is so interesting for me, coming from a country, small country, where reputation, press reputation, and being part of this kind of press council or signing ethics code is not a must. You can gain reputation just publishing scandalous article. And you also mentioned that it is because of Nazi past of Germany that Presserat might have this luck, this success. I'm sorry, but I also want to know: is there like any tools to promote your press council and within the public and also journalists, which is also important, as we saw also in presentation, was that in Belgium, like it's 20%, but I think in Germany, many more know about Presserat and also journalists, which is important because in country, like I'm from Armenia, many journalists don't know we have press council or what is press council or ombudsman. And the second question, last year when I was at Swedish public television, they had some worries because public trust towards them is higher. Because like I was surprised, like, aren't you happy to have more public trust than you had before? And they said, well, we have this study, if I'm not mistaken, in the University of Gothenburg. They have this study that more people trust media, the more media can turn into a tool, propaganda tool, or maybe they can have this schemes against the public. So thank you very much. That's it.
So I think it's for Sonia mostly.
Yes, thank you. I think that in Germany not everyone knows the press council, of course. It's a very insider thing, I think, but nevertheless I think the broad acceptance is because it's also a selling point. It also makes quality. If you can tell your readers you have reliable information, you wouldn't find a victim of a car crash on our first site, on our first page, and so on. The quality press really uses these ethical principles to have some standards and to show them to their readers. On the other hand, of course, we have also the tabloid press. They don't like us, I have to say. We are a little bit, in the public, maybe we are their enemy. I mean, it's quite nice to have an enemy in a way, you know, to be against something. But on the other hand, they publish our public reprimands and they give us a statement to every complaint we get. So I think they are quite happy not to have a state authority, and they really want to avoid state authorities to mingle in to press things. So I think that's, in their view, it's much better to have like a Landesmedienanstalt, it's called in Germany, to have a state authority. But I see it as a big challenge because young people do not read a print newspaper anymore, and they get their information from social media, a high percentage, and so I think it's a big challenge for us as a press council to reach these generations, or this generation. And we really try to go to schools to talk with teachers because, as you said, media literacy is very important. Unfortunately, we do not have in Germany a media literacy scheme because our schools are organized not by the government as a whole, but by the Länder, it's called. We are a federal system. And so every state in Germany has different priorities in this, or there are no priorities because, first of all, there are others. And so we really try to go to schools and to talk to young people. Yes.
And about the public trust?
Could you ask that question again?
Yes. My story was a little bit long, like about Swedish public television. When they had higher, they were worried because they have higher public trust. So, is it a problem to be publicly widely accepted or not? What is your view? Because at first time when I heard that they don't like it, I was shocked. How you don't like it? Because your public trusts you. And they were like, maybe we can turn into a propaganda scheme, like propaganda tool in the hands of our government or other actors.
Okay, so we as a press council, we are against everything that government does to regulate press or media. I think it's the role of the media itself to take the responsibility, not to play with the trust. We see it, for example, with the biggest tabloid, the Bild. I just showed you this article. They really have to fight to get some target groups because they are losing readers now, and so they really try to find some new target groups, people being homophobic, being against migration and so on. So that's their model, I would say, at the moment. But on the other hand, they have very big and professional newsrooms, and they really divide opinion from facts. So they wouldn't report something wrong in that way, and otherwise they would get a public reprimand and they would print that. So I think the system in Germany works, and I think that every media that is committed to the press council really tries to care about that. That's the only thing I can say about it.
Okay, there was someone at the front. Yes, you can.
Thank you very much. My name is Tana Prelec. I'm a research fellow at the University of Oxford. I wanted to ask the panel, how do you see the connection between disinformation and propaganda and corruption and organized crime? So clearly, the money aspect is quite important in this whole story. And I mean, arguably it's increasingly so because we have both kleptocracies, so authoritarian regimes relying on a lot of money, and kleptocrats, so individuals who have made their wealth with proceeds that are often illegal, who have an interest in shaping information also abroad in a way that they want. So we have cases such as, speaking about Russia, but not only, we know about Azerbaijan that has used a lot of their money to influence, politics and public opinion in the West and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you see this connection? Do you see it as an increasing challenge? Perhaps, some of the solutions that you have been applying in your countries, and, what lies ahead? Thank you.
Si j'ai bien compris la question, c'est le lien entre corruption et propagande. Do you understand French? Okay, thank you very much. Je pense qu'il y a un lien, mais ça n'est peut-être pas l'essentiel aujourd'hui. Que la propagande soit le fait de corrupteurs ou qu'elle soit simplement le fait de corrupteurs des âmes, et non pas de corrupteurs financiers, son effet est le même. La lutte contre la corruption, c'est un problème qui dépasse le journalisme, c'est un problème d'État, c'est un problème de citoyens, c'est un problème politique, ce n'est pas un problème purement d'information. Alors bien sûr, on peut faire un lien entre la corruption et la propagande dans le journalisme, enfin plutôt dans la lutte contre les fausses informations, mais moi il ne me semble pas que ce soit l'essentiel. Il doit exister ce lien, c'est sûr, et quand il existe, les journalistes, leur rôle, c'est de le dénoncer et d'informer le public de ce lien. Mais je pense que s'il n'y avait que la corruption comme acteur de la propagande, ça serait presque facile.
Okay, yes, just 2 rows behind you. Just there, yes. Oh, you wanted to answer? Oh, you wanted to... Okay, sorry. Jome, go ahead and then we'll take another question. Sorry.
If I understood your question, it was about foreign-sponsored disinformation, right? In other countries, like...
So the role of corruption and perhaps also business ownership, that might be owned, so media might be owned by people who have not the best intentions and their money is made illegally, and propaganda, if you see that as connected and how.
Yeah, sure. I mean, not particularly in the country where I live, in Spain, for example. I was thinking more... Is this?
A bit louder.
A bit louder? Yeah, better. In Spain, for example, the problem we have with foreign-sponsored disinformation, I was thinking more about COVID-19, for example, that we have identified several accounts, for example, Russian-sponsored disinformation, about trying to connect, and that was interesting in Spain as well in other countries, towards the issue of vaccines, for example, mixing people that was more at the right side with people that was in the left side, finding a common ground to actually attack this kind of trust on the system, because Spain has a public health system, so actually going against the vaccination process was actually going against trust on the system, which is actually what this information is trying to do, diminish trust. So actually in the case of Spain, foreign-sponsored disinformation, and I have seen it in other countries talking with other colleagues, was precisely about this, try to find issues that skip the borders between left and right, so you can find a niche, I don't know if I explained well, a kind of niche that you can take profit of that with a very controversial issue. If this is
Okay, you can go now, sorry.
I speak French and English.
You can, if the question is for Pierre, you can ask it in French. Otherwise, maybe English.
Ok, ben je vais résumer peut-être en anglais tout de suite après.
Okay.
Non, en fait, je voudrais, comme on a conseillé tout à l'heure la lecture d'un livre, j'aimerais conseiller un autre. Je pense qu'il serait extrêmement intéressant de lire, à moins que vous l'ayez déjà fait, le livre de Margaret Sullivan, Newsroom Confidential, qui vient de sortir. C'est un livre qui a été écrit par la personne qui a travaillé comme ombudswoman du New York Times et comme responsable de la critique médiatique au Washington Post. C'est un livre qui est extrêmement intéressant parce que, contrairement aux pays comme ici où on tente à focaliser l'attention sur les conseils de presse quand on parle de déontologie, on externalise d'une certaine manière la réflexion journalistique en l'exportant vers un conseil de presse, au risque de déculpabiliser en partie la responsabilité des médias. Aux États-Unis, il n'y a pas de conseil de presse national. Il y a des petits conseils de presse au Minnesota, mais il n'y a pas de conseil de presse national. Et en fait, la réflexion doit se faire au sein des rédactions. Et le livre de Margaret Sullivan est extrêmement passionnant pour ça, parce qu'elle décrit de manière très concrète comment se prennent les décisions et comment se commettent les erreurs au sein des plus grandes rédactions. Elle ne travaillait pas à Fox News, elle travaillait au New York Times, avec des erreurs, à la fois des erreurs de factualité, mais aussi d'éthique. Et elle réfléchissait à 3 choses. Il parlait de la doctrine journalistique. On ne peut pas parler de déontologie journalistique si on ne parle pas d'abord de la doctrine de journalisme. Est-ce que vous êtes le public interest journalism, par exemple, ou bien vous êtes pour une vision très commerciale du métier? Et c'est un choix. Moi, j'ai été professeur de déontologie pendant 15 ans ici, à l'IEX, et c'était quelque chose que je présente au départ. Pourquoi faites-vous ce métier? Pour qu'on vous voie à la télévision? Parce que ça vous amuse d'être invité au Qatar actuellement pour couvrir un événement, ou bien parce que vous voulez réellement donner de l'information qui permettra au public de se comporter en citoyen, ce qui est le rôle du journalisme d'intérêt public. La deuxième chose, c'était le modèle économique du média. Et là, en Europe, on voit des groupes de presse, par exemple, qui ont des déontologies différentes selon les médias qu'ils possèdent. La déontologie de Die Welt n'est pas la même que Bild Zeitung. C'est le même groupe de presse, Springer. Il y a des exemples en Belgique également, en France aussi. Dans le groupe Bolloré, il y a des médias différents qui répondent à des conceptions déontologiques différentes. Et finalement, il y a le système de décision au sein des rédactions qui est essentiel. Et la question que j'aurais, donc, c'est cette question-là. Comment est-ce qu'on fait le lien entre les conseils de déontologie avec les rédactions? Est-ce qu'on interagit avec les directions des rédactions? Parce que c'est là que le problème se pose, réellement. So, just in a few words, I mean, I just advise you to read Margaret Sullivan's Newsroom Confidential. It's full of lots of reflection that just presented in French, and that I guess you understood, all of you, very well.
Pierre, maybe, in French? To a question of how newsrooms and...
J'entends la question. Dans ce que vous avez dit, je vois presque une contradiction. C'est que si on laisse l'analyse déontologique, la réflexion sur le respect de l'éthique à l'intérieur du média, et de chaque média dans un groupe, ça veut dire que la déontologie de l'information, la déontologie du journalisme va varier selon le journal. Ça veut dire qu'un journaliste qui va d'abord travailler dans tel média va avoir tel respect de la déontologie, telle règle de déontologie, et puis quand il va changer de média, il va en avoir une autre. C'est bizarre, cette espèce d'éthique à géométrie variable. Alors ça serait formidable s'il y avait une sorte d'unanimité de la profession et des éditeurs par rapport aux normes éthiques. C'est peut-être le cas aux États-Unis, je ne connais pas assez bien le système pour pouvoir répondre. Je ne suis pas certain d'ailleurs que ce soit le cas aux États-Unis, parce que je pense que l'éthique de Fox News et celle du Times ne doivent pas être exactement la même, a priori. Hein. Donc il me semble quand même que les conseils de presse, du coup, jouent un rôle utile pour tenter d'harmoniser, de chercher des réponses communes à des problèmes qui se posent à travers l'ensemble de la profession, à l'ensemble de la société démocratique, dans la démocratie. Est-ce que les conseils de presse ont des contacts, ont une influence sur les éditeurs? Je vais laisser ma collègue allemande répondre à cela, parce qu'elle a une expérience avec beaucoup plus de recul que le CDJM français qui n'a que 3 ans, et qui est encore en phase d'essayer de conquérir l'intérêt des éditeurs, même si jour après jour nous en obtenons de nouvelles adhésions. Mais nous sommes en phase de croissance pour que les éditeurs viennent chez nous. Cela dit, j'ai des bons signes. C'est que quand nous nous adressons maintenant à un journal ou à une télévision en disant, ou à un producteur d'émissions d'information, en disant il y a tel ou tel problème déontologique, nous avons des réponses. Ça veut dire qu'il y a une prise en intérêt de la chose. J'ajouterai une dernière chose concernant purement la France. Pendant très longtemps, les journalistes français se sont construits sur l'idée que la déontologie ne regardait qu'eux, ne regardait pas le public, qu'ils ne devaient de compte qu'à leur père. Vous chercherez dans l'histoire de la presse française un procès où les pairs ont rendu un avis déontologique, et si vous le trouvez, je vous invite à dîner dans le meilleur restaurant de Bruxelles. Et les journalistes français et la profession française s'est construite sur cette position de surplomb assez insupportable. Certains d'entre vous diront très française, je le dis à leur place, mais je pense que les choses évoluent, et notamment dans la génération de jeunes confrères et consoeurs qui nous suivent.
Je veux seulement faire une remarque. Je n'oppose pas évidemment les conseils de déontologie à ce qui se passe dans la rédaction. Personnellement, je suis partisan des conseils de déontologie, mais j'estime que dans les rédactions, et j'ai été dans pas mal de rédactions, notamment comme rédacteur en chef, la discussion déontologique est nettement insuffisante. Et que le conseil de déontologie ne déresponsabilise un peu, pourrait, on se dit, bon, c'est bien, c'est le CDJ qui va en juger.
Vous avez totalement raison. J'ai toujours dit que dans les rédactions, la déontologie, c'était la discussion à la machine à café, et pas dans la conférence de rédaction. Ça change. Ça change, et je pense, en tout cas de mon expérience française, c'est que l'existence d'un conseil de déontologie en France commence à faire bouger les choses, mais je pense que l'expérience allemande, l'expérience belge va le démontrer aussi.
Sonia, do you want me to summarize the question, maybe? Or did you understand?
Yeah, I understood it a bit, but maybe you
Okay, so basically, how do you conciliate internal deontology ethics in the newsrooms and external self-regulation with the press council? Isn't self-regulation through a press council a way of deculpability? I don't know if it's a word in English, but do journalists and newsroom escape their responsibility by saying, oh, it's the press council's problem, basically? Mm-hmm. How do you conciliate both?
Well, the most important addressee for our complaints are actually not the tabloid newspapers, but the regional newspapers. And especially from them, we get very elaborated statements. You know, it's always, if there's a complaint, we will send the complaint to the newspaper, and the journalist who wrote the article or his editor-in-chief will write a statement how they see this matter. And we see that in terms of flaws, very normal flaws that happen in newsrooms, that they correct them transparently, I would say in 80% of the cases, and that we get very long statements about it. And I think that a complaint at the press council is something you will talk about within the newsroom. It's not a nice thing to get a complaint, and it's not a nice thing for the journalist who wrote the article. So I think from the side of the editorial newsrooms, we are taken quite seriously, and I think that we are part of the quality management there. Obviously, this is my impression.
Okay, I think Muriel Hano wants to respond for the CDJ, the French and German-speaking Belgian Press Council.
Just only a few things. First, we released our rulings naming the journalists and the media, and because we name them, journalists and the media are aware that they do not want to be pointed, and so they take measures inside their newsrooms to correct and to adjust their ethical behavior. So an important newspaper here in Belgium, Sud Presse, which was which has had a lot of negative rulings against it, has taken decision in internal decision to correct it, and it works. So we have an effect on ethical standards. Sometimes we do not intervene directly on it. It happens without our words, but it happens. In other places, we are asked to give trainings, and we organize a workshop on the demand. And for instance, I was yesterday at Le Soir, which is a big newspaper here in Brussels, and they asked us to organize several trainings the next year. So we are ready to do so. So we learn. We give our learning to the journalists and to the newsroom. So it's a very interconnected. It's sometimes it can, from the outside, it may appear separate things, but finally it's very interconnected.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question that I'm a bit surprised by what has been said about the different councils, saying if it's not journalism, we don't accept the complaints. And I will take the example of France. This is my country, and I know that. I know it's better than other countries, that we have a phenomenon of concentration, media concentration in France. about 5 persons own almost all the media in France. I think Belgium have a similar situations, if I understood well, but I'm not sure about Belgium. But sometimes we see on the name of one of the guys have been mentioned by somebody before me, buying some media, and he wants to use his media for his ideology, and we see a decrease, a dramatic decrease in the quality of the editorial quality. And no official council say anything. If we take the example of Italy in France that becomes CNews, it becomes CNews. I don't know how many journalists left the media, almost all the, and they don't have any more journalists. But no council in France, and there are two. There are the CDGM, but there are the ARCOM also. Nobody say anything. And who is responsible for that? Is it what council is responsible for that?
I'll let Pierre respond, because it's about France. I can already say that the ARCOM is not a press council. It's a regulator, but...
Je pense qu'effectivement, pour reprendre juste la fin de votre question, il ne faut pas confondre la régulation administrative, qui est celle faite, par exemple, en Belgique par le CSA, en France par ce qui est aujourd'hui l'ARCOM, ou par d'autres institutions dans d'autres pays, et l'autorégulation déontologique de l'information. Ce sont deux choses différentes.
Ces news prétendent faire de l'information.
Vous me permettez d'aller jusqu'au bout de mon raisonnement. Donc déjà, ne confondons pas les deux. Moi, je ne peux pas vous répondre sur ce que fait l'ARCOM. Je dirais simplement que je pense que ça n'est pas à une autorité politico-administrative de dire ce qui est éthiquement correct en matière d'information. Je dis bien en matière d'information des citoyens. Si nous rentrons dans cette logique-là, nous ne sommes plus très loin de ce que j'évoquais tout à l'heure, du contrôle de l'État sur le contenu de l'information. Donc tant que l'ARCOM en France fera ou tentera de faire un contrôle de la qualité éthique de l'information, nous aurons un problème politique en France. Pour ce qui est maintenant de la réponse à votre question, CNews prétendent faire de l'information. Excusez-moi, CNews fait des journaux d'information. Que vous ne soyez pas, monsieur, que vous ne soyez pas d'accord avec leur contenu, c'est tout à fait respectable. Mais ils font des journaux d'information. Il nous est arrivé d'être saisis sur des contenus de CNews, de dire qu'ils ne respectaient pas la déontologie, ça nous est arrivé, et de dire, moins souvent pour eux, de dire qu'ils le respectaient dans le cas en question. Oui, mais excusez-moi, ça n'est pas parce que nous ne sommes pas en accord ou que quelqu'un n'est pas en accord avec la ligne éditoriale, voire idéologique d'un média.
Vous m'apprenez sur ma question, ça n'a rien à voir avec la ligne éditoriale. J'ai supporté des journaux qui n'avaient pas du tout...
J'entends bien, monsieur, mais moi je vous réponds sur ce que fait le Conseil de presse. Le Conseil de presse, il est saisi sur des actes journalistiques, c'est-à-dire des volontés d'informer le public. Si ça ne respecte pas la déontologie, on le dit. Et concernant CNews, permettez-moi de vous le dire que malheureusement pour CNews, ou heureusement peut-être qu'ils s'en foutent, nous avons plusieurs fois pris des avis négatifs. Mais il nous est arrivé aussi de donner tort à un requérant qui considérait que CNews n'avait pas, dans tel ou tel cas, respecté la déontologie. Nous avons expliqué pourquoi la déontologie, à nos yeux, avait été respectée. Respecter la déontologie, ça n'est pas uniquement aller dans un certain sens sur le fond, c'est aussi respecter des règles qui s'imposent à tout le monde.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question and then we'll have to wrap up. Does anyone have a question or no? Okay, one last question.
Actually, it's not a question. It's just to go back to the debate about how far press councils could be useful inside. Well, there are many, many journalists in France who used to feel really lonely because there were no one only ethic charts because we have 3. No one is in the law in France. So when you feel you have to do your job properly, I mean, ethically, aesthetically, about ethics, I mean, you feel very lonely. And now that you have a press council, I know many young journalists who think at least some other people outside can be kind of moral support, because I can tell my chief, well, listen, I saw on the CDGM, blah, 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 and I feel it's useful. And maybe we can have the wish that press councils are like poverty organization, association, I mean, organization who try to fight poverty, when there won't be any usefulness for press councils. It means that ethics will have, in English, will have been back into newsrooms. Is that correct? Maybe.
Thank you. Okay, so our time is almost up, so I wanted to end this roundtable with the last example of how journalistic ethics and press councils can make a difference to better inform citizens. I was talking earlier about standing out as an incentive to join a press council. Well, this is it. So in Finland, the media, which display this mark of accountable journalism, show to their audience that they are committed to the code of journalistic ethics of the Press Council, including the obligation of checking facts and correcting errors. So this mark is not a form of protection, of course, as every citizen can file a complaint against this media, but it shows that responsible media care about publishing truthful information in a global context of increasing disinformation, propaganda, and other fake news. So many thanks once again to Homé, Pierre, and Sonia. Let's give them a round of applause, please.
Thank you very much for translating.
Thank you. And thank you, of course, to EX, to Les Assises for organizing this roundtable. And thank you all for coming, participating. We hope you are now convinced that press councils are truly essential in defending free, independent, and reliable information. Thank you.